wherever you are and whenever you are. Welcome, good souls, to Paranormal Now. I'm Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Joining me tonight is David Collis. David is the author of the book Interviewing Jesus, the Man. So tonight is going to be a different night for us, but not quite so different, since we'll be looking at an alternative look, maybe a speculative look at history. And we do that a lot here. It's just tonight we're doing that with Jesus of Nazareth. And happy Easter to everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. A special thank you for Bill Skywatcher and David Collis for making this show happen fairly last minute. So I'm glad we all get to hang out here tonight on this holiday. As a friendly reminder, in the last 30 minutes, the call-in lines will be open. So if you'd like to call in to ask our guest your question, that number is 1-855-472-5483 for the Paranormal Radio app hotline. And that is 1-85-KGRA Live. Share your thoughts with me during or after the show in the comment section on Twitter, or here on the show, YouTube comment section, Facebook comment section. And if there's anybody out there on Periscope, we'll see your comments too. On a rare occasion, someone actually pops in from Periscope, which is interesting. So that app is still going strong. All right. So again, the Paranormal Radio app line is 1-85-KGRA Live. And, you know, we've all, I think, whether we were raised Christian or not, have been exposed to the supposed, alleged, or life of Jesus Christ. Now, I was raised Catholic. I am no longer Catholic, but I am utterly fascinated with, you know, what really happened back then outside of the four Gospels that we, you know, studied in CCD, were preached about, and to. And for me, my journey in understanding who Jesus was an evolution. And I think that, yes, he's historical, you know, but is he in fact God incarnate? There's so many questions. There's so much written about him, including the Gnostic Gospels, that, you know, thousands of years later, we discovered, you know, nearly 1,500 years later, and we find out there were all these other ideas about who he was. And for some, that strengthens their faith. For others, it weakens, or perhaps a better term is it changes their faith. But no matter how we look back on the history of Jesus, there is something sort of, you know, deeply mythic and magical about it. And no doubt his parables and the messages he shared are not only universal, but can be profoundly moving and revolutionary, not in its own time, but still today we're striving to be those better people, to be loving and inclusive. And while we are imperfect, you know, we have our temper tantrums too. And that's part of being human. And that's, I think, why so many of us relate to Jesus as opposed to Yahweh or God, because God is not a biological being, but Jesus was. So either that was really brilliant storytelling, or one of the most amazing truths of all time. David, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Hi, thank you for being on the show, and I really appreciate all of your introductions.
Absolutely. So real quick, David Collis, he is a native of Southern California. He's driven by the romance of quests, exploration, and invention. He is captivated by art, architecture, craft, religion, and the humanities. His diverse talents are as rich as his experiences. He's traveled the world, made pilgrimages to holy sites, built a stone energy circle. We're going to have to talk about that. A stone energy circle and labyrinth, conducted a vision quest. Oh, it's getting juicy. Explored the alternative healing modalities, learned the hidden language of dreams, investigated the religions of the world, lectured on the Gospel of Thomas, and created a new series of sacred symbols he says are original symbols for a new era. David holds a BFA and an MFA, Interviewing Jesus, The Man is his first book, and you can find out more about David at davidcollis.com. So David, tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe how that led into you researching and writing about Jesus' alternative history, his lost years.
Well, to begin with, my fascination with the divine has been with me since I can, my earliest memories. So I go all the way back to 3 or 4. And the idea of the divine and idea of something else beyond our world has always fascinated me. And when I was a teenager, I was really fascinated by the ideas that Zecharia Sitchin was talking about, and the chariots of the god and Bermuda Triangle and the power of the mind and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then at 19, I had an existential crisis, and it kind of focused and sharpened my interest in wanting to understand more about the divine. And I landed in Christianity 2 years later, and I really kind of was on fire for that. And I dug deep into that rich tradition, which it is. There's an enormous amount of information in Christianity, and it has had such a major impact on the Western world for 2,000 years. So being an artist and being interested in art history, you can't, get away from any of that. Right. And also, we have a rich tradition in architecture that's, directly devoted to Christianity. So,
right, it's embedded deeply into our culture.
And the law, everything, law, morality, art, literature, it's all there, and it's almost impossible to extract.
Right, and with colonialism and the spreading around the world, those ideas were, impressed upon others, and some of them have stuck as well. So yes. Yeah, it's only serves us to better understand the background here, and even the mysteries, because we know that the outside of the 4 books of the Gospels, that there was so much more to Jesus of Nazareth. Now, for you, is any one book more true than the other? And strictly speaking of the 4 Gospels.
Well, this is a very interesting point, because there's several fascinations and several directions that I had to explore. So there's a historical element. Mm-hmm. There was the Christian mystics, and then there's the whole theological kind of side to Christianity. And of course, we all understand the Christian theological perspective that Jesus was the Son of God and he died for your sins. But I didn't fully appreciate the depth of the history and what was taking place in the first century, and then the subsequent centuries after that. I didn't fully appreciate what the Nicene Creed was, even though I went to Episcopal Church. And so there was all of those facets that I felt that it was necessary to explore. Mm-hmm. And so there was the mystical side. So there was Thomas Merton, and then there was St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila, and that whole Christian side of the mystics, of which was a very, very fascinating subject to explore. And then there was the historical development, which was also a very fascinating element to explore. And then also the theological perspective. So all of that seemed to be what I was motivated by. And then right. I seem to have had an epiphany, which is how did Jesus, if I were to remove the idea of Jesus as the Son of God from the equation, what would I see? And all of a sudden, that became a very intriguing question for me. And that's how most of this got started. So,
what did you see?
Well, I looked at, first of all, I had a fairly strong mystical experience back in 2012. And in that experience, it was almost as if there was a moment in which so much information from the mystical side of all of the human traditions just came into me in an instant. And so with the snap of about 3 or 4 fingers, I just felt like I just received an encyclopedia of all that knowledge. And from there, I was able to recognize that Jesus was speaking from a different perspective than from the position that I had been reading about, mm-hmm. and from the position from history. So there was another element that was going on that was either rejected or completely misunderstood. And I think that there's an element of both of those ideas that became part of the Christian tradition.
Sure. Hey,
So,
David, is there any chance you can turn your speaker down just a hair?
Sure. Hold on. Let me see if this helps.
We're just getting a little bit of an echo.
Is that helping at all?
Yeah, that's better. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good.
So anyway, go ahead.
Well, I think the big question is, did Jesus, did he resurrect? Is this mythology? As a historian, looking at it as a historian, what do you see there?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's just kind of go through and just say, what are some of the ideas that seem to be prevalent at the time of Jesus?
Sure.
So we think that it's just as if he's the Son of God, and that idea never existed outside of Christianity. But that's not true at all. It existed throughout the Mediterranean world, particularly in Egypt and also in the Mesopotamian.
Speaking of like
cultures.
Osiris and...
Right. Okay. In fact, part of the Christian myth has an Osirian dimension to it. And then there's also a Greek Dionysian element to it as well. And it's a type of an agricultural myth. But okay, that's different.
Okay.
However, let me just mention this.
Sure.
When we talk about the Pharaoh of Egypt, he was considered God incarnate. So Jesus is now considered God incarnate. Mm-hmm. And then anybody that was associated with the Pharaoh, if he was the son, he was also considered the Son of God. That idea also filtered into the Roman Empire, of which, Jesus was part of that, even though he was Hebrew. And so we have Caesar as God, and the son of Caesar was also considered a God. He was considered the Son of God. So we're getting these ideas already filtering through and spreading through the Mediterranean. So there was no new idea.
But I was going to say, this is what makes it unique, is that it's a one-time deal, apparently, right? That's what they're saying, is that it's only happened once, and this is the one true reincarnation.
Exactly. And so what it was is that it wasn't that extraordinary. What makes it more extraordinary is the fact that there was a group of people that decided that was necessary to apply to Jesus at that time, when it used to be applied to essentially the rulers of society. Mm-hmm. So, and that made me believe that there was an element of genius about Jesus that was head and shoulders above a lot of other people, and that they recognized that. And that even goes so far as in the Christian literature, Jesus is personified as wisdom. So, I mean, there was an element of him, of speaking the truth and walking the truth and being very, very wise and having all these powers, that there was something, in a sense, magical and very amazing about him, and that he seemed to be something other than human. Other than human. And, right. He was head and shoulders above a lot of what was going on at that time. So. Okay. And so what do you think? Do you think that it was he kind of wove this idea that made him special? Because, I mean, to think about it in terms of condemning your own life, purposely setting this up so that you would suffer, all just to get people to believe you, that seems beyond narcissistic. I don't know what that is. That's like, it seems to have that sort of foresight and make that happen seems beyond genius. Okay, so this is a very important idea. The question is what did Jesus know, and what was he experiencing? And what did he feel that his society was lacking, that he wanted to fulfill? He wanted to fill that vacuum of what was missing. And so there seems to be an enormous amount of tension and frustration and anger and disappointment and anxiety about current affairs at that particular time. And Jesus was now bringing something very different to the world, or at least his world, that was trying to calm some of the storm, so to speak. There's a lot of injustice. The Romans were occupying. I mean, we have no idea what it means to be occupied, but the best you can do is, read some of the accounts of during World War II of what the Nazis were like, or even what the communists were like after the war, and just what occupation was like. And so the Roman occupation had an element of that to it. And that was very different than what the Jews were accustomed to. So that was part of the problem. The other problem is that Herod the Great was not a full Jew. He was half Jew. He didn't come from a royal lineage. That created an enormous amount of stress on people. The high priests weren't necessarily legitimate high priests according to a number of people. And so that created enormous stress. The high priests at the time were also making sacrifices to Rome and to Caesar, and that didn't, get anybody happy. Part of the way the Romans worked is that they were interested in the highest bid, so to speak. So if you were able to buy your way into the high priest, they allowed you to do that. So that meant that you kind of weren't legitimate. The Essenes were out out there by the Dead Sea, and they were creating an entire community that said, we are the only ones that are the true Jews. At the time that Jesus was born, roughly around that time, there was a man by the name of Judas the Galilean, and he felt that any Jew who allowed the Romans to occupy them and to tax them and to have census, meaning they needed to know who you were and what you owned, and then they were going to tax you. He felt that you now became a slave to them, and as a slave, you are no longer free to worship Yahweh in the way that you were. So he went on a rampage with his followers. This is very fascinating. With his followers, and started slaughtering all the Jews that acquiesced to the Romans.
Wait, this is Judas?
This is Judas the Galilean.
Judas the Galilean.
This is the time when Jesus was born. And so when Judas the Galilean was on his rampaging, just destroying and killing and burning people's properties and killing livestock, is the time when the gospel stories begin. And so that account of that story it's in the book of Acts, but it's not in the Gospels, and which to me makes Joseph and Mary fleeing to Egypt all the more real, that they were trying to get rid of or get out of harm's way, and this is one of the ways that they felt that they needed to deal with. So. I
mean, that's utterly volatile, of course. I absolutely understand that. So they're kind of like refugees because of this insurgence of a radicalization.
Yes.
Okay. So, that really, if Jesus was raised by these two parents, I'm sure he heard these stories, right? Growing up.
And not only just hit the stories from his parents, but he lived in an area when they came back. They lived in the area of which these areas were all burnt and torched and killed. And so there was all these people that were left over from these terror strikes. So you can imagine, I mean, I have friends that are from the South, and they talk about the Civil War as if it happened yesterday. Yeah. And I don't imagine the Jews at that time were any different. So there must have been in their minds this idea that things can go bad, and they can go bad very quickly. So, and that there was all that pain and anger and frustration. And this guy was from the Galilee. This is where Jesus was teaching. Oddly enough, this is a very fascinating period of time.
Oh, absolutely. And it forged this great figure.
Yes.
Why did the Council of Nicaea, in your opinion, choose the four Gospels that it did and leave out these other texts that give us more of a richer backstory and understanding?
Okay, so the Council of Nicaea is roughly, let's just say, round off the figures, roughly 300 years after Jesus died. So just try to imagine the Roman Empire 300 years after, Jesus' death, and what was going on with Christianity at the time. Christianity had spread quite a bit. It had infiltrated the dialogue. There was possibly as many as 20% or more of the population was considered Christian. Constantine, who was the emperor at the time, was fighting a civil war. And because Rome was so big, they had to divide it up into different territories. So at one point there was 4 different emperors ruling different sections of the empire, and then it was 2, and then Constantine fought, and he became the ruler of all of them. Yeah. And one of the visions that he had was that of the cross, and so he felt that the Christians that were persecuted just essentially right before this civil war, that he wanted to stop that, and he wanted to get all the Christians on board to come together, and he was going to sanction Christianity as an official Roman religion. Okay, because it got the seal of approval, anything that was now outside of what they agreed to was considered heretical. So there was a legal dimension to that. Now, why those 4 Gospels became part of the canon, and this is very important because there was no canon at that point. So the Council of Nicaea was to create a book, a document that we have today. And they felt, as they went through all the various literature that was available, and there was tons of it, and there was different ideas. There was Jesus, who was only, he was God, and that's all he was. Jesus was only a man. There was the hybrid, Jesus was man and God concept, and all these Christians had various ideas on who Jesus was. And there's, of course, the Gnostics are part of that. So I call this the kind of the zoo. There was so many different versions of Christianity that Constantine said, we're going to have one version, and you guys are going to have to figure that out, and you're not leaving until you do.
Was this a political move on Constantine's part? Like when he said that, or was this part of a plan? Did he actually see a cross, or did he kind of use that as a propaganda to set this into motion and try to unify? And
I think that visions and mystical experiences were very prevalent at that time. I think they are today too. I mean, you're involved with the paranormal, so there are mystical experiences of which we can't explain. And so apparently he saw a cross, and the cross was more akin to what you would see as an ankh or something in Egypt. So he just associated that with Christianity. And like I said, Christianity had kind of gotten to the point where it represented 20 or 25, maybe even 30% of Roman society. And so it was a really good idea to kind of come together and unify Christianity in a way that would not make it, in conflict with Rome anymore and with itself.
So it was kind of a hybridization of his mystical revelation and political, plannings.
Well, yes. And so, again, rigid ideas, spirituality, and religions, they come and go. In fact, because of all the territory that Rome was involved with, I mean, we're going all the way up into, England, all the way to, Britain, down into the Black Sea, down into the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, there was religions and spirituality of all types. And so one of the things that the Romans were very, very good at is they were always interested in organizing and creating libraries. So they had a vast array of information, and they had, believe it or not, a person in charge. And then from there was 4, again, they divided it up into 4 territories. So that person that was in charge of all the religion and all the spirituality of the Roman Empire was considered, he was the pontiff. And this is before the Vatican.
Yeah.
So
a
it was one person in charge of all of this information. Right,
a predecessor to the Pope, as it were.
Exactly.
All right, so there's a lot more to cover here, and I certainly want to cover the mystical and mysticism side of all of this, because the Gnostics had some very different ideas of not only Jesus, but of the Creator, him or itself. Or creators. It was really a fascinating period. I wish I could have been around to lend an ear and peek my head into these chapels and I guess basement settings of small groups with all these variations. So
yes,
we'll cover so much more of this with our guest David Collis. He is the author of Interviewing Jesus the Man. And thank you again for all hanging out with us this happy Easter. We will see you on the flip side.
mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
I'm a mess, but a hot mess. Dreaming with my eyes open. I'm a mess, but a hot mess. I'm not scared of being broken. I've been going and I don't wanna be found. Go and I don't wanna be found. I live for the
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith. Taking us out of the break was music by Lizette Xavier. If you'd like to hear more, find out more about Lizette Xavier at LizetteXavier.com. All right, we are back with our guest, the author David Collis. David, so I do want to switch gears for a little bit here, because there was a time where Jesus was off the record, as it were. And, a lot of people think that, he had studied under mystery religions or mystery schools, maybe even as far east as Tibet or India. So can you tell us about those years and what you have discovered that you think he discovered?
Okay. Yeah, this is very, very important. There are a couple of things that we were going to talk about in the previous that maybe we can kind of touch back about the nature of resurrection and whatnot. But according to this, okay, so one of the things that fascinated me was what inspired Jesus. Here's a man who was a highly religious, highly kind of mystical, extraordinarily intelligent. He was a poet. He was a wordsmith. He knew how to tell stories. He knew how to captivate people with story. I mean, there was just something very magnetic about this man that was quite remarkable. And so I asked myself, kind of in this later phase, after like 2012, when I had that mystical experience, I said, what were your influences? How did your family shape you? How did your society shape you? Those were big issues for me. But more importantly, what kind of experiences did you have that affected you directly, that would cause you to, one, step out into your ministry, and then two, talk about the things that you talked about? So where did those influences come from? Where did your ideas come from? Now, if you say that it's the Son of God, then okay, well, now you don't have to go very far because it's all self-contained within Jesus. But I didn't take that position. In fact, I really kind of said I wanted to put that aside and I want to look at things from a very different point of view. And I had to go in and say, what were your influences? I kind of look back at my life, who influenced me, why, what was going on, and I said, I'm no different than them. It just happens to be that there's 2,000 years difference.
Well, yeah, you were saying this already. He was so eloquent, and he comes off as a very educated person, and yet he was supposed to just be a carpenter's son, right?
Exactly.
There's more to him than that. Exactly.
Okay, so here's a couple of things. When he gets into his aphorism,
no offense to carpenters out there.
Yeah, and I actually have done a lot of carpentry work, so
there you go. And you're a smart man. All right.
So there are some similarities. When he gets into part of his wisdom sayings, he is not using the Hebrew concept of wisdom. And if you go and you read the book of the Proverbs in the Old Testament, you're going to see that there's a lot of moralisms to those stories. And, kind of like really good little stories that will tell you how to avoid some conflicts in your life, etc. Jesus doesn't seem to be moving down that road. In fact, he's using Greek rhetoric. He's using a Greek rhetorical style. That's very fascinating. That's a very important idea. And some of his ideas, like the Father, are Pythagorean. So when he is speaking of the Father, he is using the same term Pythagoras used to describe the divine, to describe zero, the idea, the concept of beyond the mystery, the space, in which there is nothing created. That's what Pythagorean was pointing to, and he referred to that as the Father. And Jesus seems to be doing the same thing.
Was there a reason Pythagorean referred to it as the Father as opposed to the Mother, or some just the moon? I mean, why did he choose that? I
think that was just there was a masculine element, and so they were just. I can't explain it, and I really don't know. But let's just. I want to say one thing. They refer to the sun as masculine, and that the earth is feminine, and so the masculine side to things was based off of the idea of change. What is the nature of change when you look at the sun? Mm-hmm. From a substantial point of view, the sun is not changing. It is not requiring anything outside of itself for its own existence. It seems to be self-contained, and it's burning this fire. Mm-hmm. It happens to change location, but it's not changing its attributes or its qualities or its substance. Okay. The earth, on the other hand, they refer to that as feminine. So the earth, it's going through changes all the time. You've got hot and cold. You have new people. You have new birds. You have new animals. You have new societies. You have new empires, etc. Sure. The world is in constant flux. And so that flux, they also were referring to that element of change as feminine. So if Pythagoras, I'm not getting into his head, but my idea is that he's using that idea is that there's an element that nothing is changing with this bit of reality.
So that relates more towards the masculine in their
and that relates to their version of the masculine side of things.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's kind of
a
cultural
non-evolving.
Thing, right?
It's like a non-evolving reality.
Does that imply stability, dependability, or is that just something else?
Did you say dependability or sustainability?
Stability.
Stability. Mm-hmm. It just seemed like there was a non-changing essence that they understood. Okay. And so if there is something that's changing versus something that's not changing, they separated those two out into different premises. One being male, that doesn't change, versus female, that which changes. Okay. And they're not using it in the same kind of context that we're dealing with gender today. Sure. Yeah. Right. So motherhood is about change, it's from the mother that things are born out of.
And so
right? That's a feminine element.
Then what is this father?
What is Jesus's idea of the Father? Or
Pythagoreans, yeah. Well,
obviously the way Jesus is being a Jew, he had a very strong understanding of his Jewish culture, his Jewish roots, the rites and the rituals, the food, all of that. I mean, Jesus was true and true. He was a Hebrew man. And he had strong feelings about the divine. But some of them didn't necessarily fit in with his new idea of how the divine works in one's life and works in society. So you'll see him say this, what difference does it make if I go out on the Sabbath and I do these things? The Sabbath God didn't, how does he say it? I'm kind of getting it mixed up. The Sabbath is not made for God, it's made for man, that kind of thing. And so Jesus was interested in changing kind of the food and diets and fasting rites. So he didn't, he was being blamed for his disciples of not fasting. He said, doesn't matter. Right. So there's elements of his understanding, his understanding of the divine, which really radically changed from the way it was understood in the Hebrew mind at that time. Plus, he was interested in changing some of the rites and the rituals and how you deal with food, how you accept people, whether or not you need to judge them. I mean, the list goes on. It's just quite remarkable.
So where did he get the Pythagorean idea?
Well, this is one of the very strange issues. Where would this idea come from? Now, let me just kind of go back to the influences of Jesus. So we have this Greek philosophy, Greek rhetorical style. We have Egyptian ideas circulating here. And Christianity is filled with them, as I mentioned before, about God incarnate. That was Pharaoh. The Egyptians were completely interested in resurrection. Sure. Paul, when he was out doing his ministry, he was quoting directly quoting directly from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So
What was he quoting directly?
He was quoting how our bodies will change from material to spiritual. As a direct quote.
The trans
how we so that's the whole thing. What's the vehicle that takes us from a physical body to a spiritual body?
So that is a concept taken from Egyptian, applied to
straight out of the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
So it's not in the Torah, this concept.
No. So that's a whole nother story, and that was like one of the books that I wanted to write after this book. The influences of interviewing Paul and what his influences were. Okay, so now we have the Hebrew influences, the Greek influences, the Egyptian influences, and now all of a sudden we're going to get into some of Jesus' sayings. And lo and behold, there's Hindu concepts in there. There are Buddhist concepts. There are Taoist concepts, and there are Confucian concepts. So the question now becomes, how did he get all that? Was there a book that he was reading? Were there people that are coming back? Did he go there? So, for example, when Jesus says in the book of John, the Gospel of John, he says, the Father and I are one. Well, that's exactly what the Hindus say, is that the Father, the bigger self, and the smaller self, the Atman and the Brahman, those, the big self and the smaller self, they're identical. It's like saying this water that I just got out of the ocean is no different than the ocean itself, even though it's a smaller container. Is that just another way of saying Alpha and Omega, meaning all of this is God? Well, that is one perspective. Alpha and Omega talk about the circularity, right? Yeah. The beginning and the end. And in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, Jesus talks about, he says when somebody asks him what's going to happen in the end, and Jesus says, don't you realize that where the end is the beginning? Yeah. So there's the Alpha and the Omega. Okay, so Confucianism, when Jesus says, do to others as you'd want them to do unto you, that's a direct quote from Confucius. And then when it comes into Taoism, when Jesus says, consider the lilies of the fields, they don't toil. So how he's using natural elements the same way that the Taoists are using natural elements. And then when it comes to the Buddhist ideas, Jesus was just so filled with Buddhist concepts that it was actually quite shocking to see. And one of them is when Jesus says, as I become smaller, then God becomes bigger. He didn't say it exactly that way, but he was alluding to the idea that as he becomes less, the Father becomes more. Well, that's a very direct Buddhist concept. In fact, Jesus' ministry has a lot of Buddhist elements to just the concept of eliminating the ego. Right. So is that similar to the Buddhist breaking down oneself? Yes. To the I, that there is no I. That's correct. So now you go back to the concept of the Father, right? The one, the zero, before there was a prime mover, right? The mystery. When you get into there is no I or ego. There's just pure potential. And then something happens to get this whole ball rolling. That's the Greeks refer to that as the first cause. So now that everything is moving, now we have an ego because the ego is now part of the creative element. Do you think he actually traveled as far as I don't know, Tibet or? I think that Jesus was an active traveler. Now, could he have picked up ideas like Taoism in Tibet or maybe even India? I mean, how far did those teachings come in the other direction at that time? I think most of it was fairly isolated. The Silk Road, when it finally opened and so it's now moving from China over towards the West, that Silk Road didn't enter into the Eastern Mediterranean until I think 150, 125, something around there. So it was in the 2nd century. So, however, let me just mention this. There was a route that you can go to get to India. And the way you did it is that you would travel down to the Red Sea, take a boat, and then from the boat, you would exit out and you'd go over to what is now Yemen. And from there, you'd get onto another boat, and then that boat, you'd catch a trade wind and it would take you east, and then you would land in the west coast of India.
And we have records of people making these trips.
So, and then when Jesus' disciple Thomas went to India. So it's almost as if maybe he is he's going through Jesus' steps.
Why do you say Thomas went to India?
There's a great deal of tradition of Thomas, doubting Thomas in India. And there's also traditions of Jesus in India as well.
No, what do you mean tradition? What does that mean exactly?
If you go into India, you'll find that there are stories of Yeshua in various parts of India. And there is shrines to Jesus in India, like in the base of the Himalayas.
And dating, do we have any idea how far back they date?
Well, no, I don't have that information, but obviously if that is true, then we have to ask ourselves, if Jesus was roughly 30 years old when he started his ministry, and he went to India, one, why did he go there? Mm-hmm. And two, when did he go there? So
is 57 kilometers from Tibet to Jerusalem? Race Hobbs just texted me, and that's a long journey.
57 kilometers?
Kilometers? Does that make sense?
No. It would be a couple of thousand miles.
A couple of thousand miles. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then maybe that was, I missed the typo here. Maybe. Okay. So how many?
No, you would have to. You couldn't go overland. It wasn't possible at that point. Now,
but the actual journey, though, not a direct route, but the actual journey you're speaking of, what would the total mileage be there?
Well, if the route that I mentioned, let's just say you went from Jerusalem to the Red Sea, and then you took the Red Sea, out to Yemen, on the outside of that, and you went to Yemen, and then you went over there. I think it's 1,500 or 2,000 miles.
Okay, so it's not this extraordinarily winding road that just expounds the mileage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I don't know how long it takes to go if you're from Yemen and you catch a trade wind and then you sail directly, to India. I don't know how long that takes. And of course, there's a trade wind at the different time of the season when it reverses and it goes the other way.
Okay, so Thomas did this. Were there any other disciples that we know of that traveled? Or were all the disciples locals? That Jesus came back after his journey, or did he pick up any along the way on his travels from somewhere far off?
My guess is that he didn't do that. So there was something very specific that he received during those missing years, and I kind of, based off of his sayings, I've been able to kind of determine some of the things that actually happened to him. So. Would you like to hear those?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay,
so Jesus was born into a very devout Jewish family. His father was a very devout Christian or Jew. This is something that you're not going to hear. But when I took all of Jesus' sayings, and when I analyzed the sayings, which mean I broke them all down into subject matter. So how many times does Jesus talk about money? Turns out he's talking about money the most. That's the number one subject that he's talking about. Now, you would think it would be the kingdom of heaven, God. No, it's money. And he breaks down money into several different categories. And when I realized that he breaks this down into different categories, and there's four, there is the concept of the merchant, there is the owner of a plantation, there is the one working with their hands, and there's one inheriting money. Those are the four major themes that are in Jesus' sayings. And I went, this is very fascinating that somebody who's supposed to be a carpenter with not a whole lot of education is now speaking on the very advanced concepts of money and how money works and trade and labor disputes, who's going to get paid, how they're going to get paid, taxes, investment returns. I mean, he's using this concept as a spiritual metaphor to talk about some of the ideas that he is now a proponent of. Yeah. And I thought, okay, there's only one way that you know that. Either you were around it or somehow you were able, you were so smart you can figure this stuff out. And I always kind of felt that there are things that Jesus is very smart about, and then there's also some things that Jesus experienced directly. Uh-huh. And it dawned on me that as I put all of these sayings together, that Jesus is speaking from a position of truth, a position of experiences.
Sure.
Jesus was talking from his own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant that there was an autobiographical content to
Yes.
his sayings.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So, and what else? What else is autobiographical that you have
Okay.
discovered?
So he came from a wealthy family, and they had money and they had means to be able to do the travel that they needed to do.
So, do you think that they could have become wealthy, or do you think they were wealthy?
No, they were already. To me, they were already wealthy, and they were involved in some type of either. They grew something, like palm trees, date palms, created some type of oil. They had a farm. They had something, and then they also were able to sell that as merchants. Because Jesus in his ministry is an entrepreneur. He is using the Father as the product, and he's selling the product out by going essentially door to door.
Well, I mean, that's evangelism.
Yeah, that's a form of evangelism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he's an entrepreneur by saying, look, I'm going to take this new idea and I'm going to get it out in the world and I'm going to do it this way. Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, we got to go back to some of the things that had to have happened during his missing years. So Jesus had a very strong sense of destiny. And I think his family did too, that he was going to do something remarkable. Jesus probably left home somewhere after his 14th birthday, maybe sometime around 17, but he was gone. He was gone for a very long time. Jesus studied and learned and practiced spiritual knowledge. I mean, there's no way that you can just kind of figure this stuff out on your own. You usually have to have a teacher, or you have to be surrounded by a library and that you are reading all the time, or you have to kind of be immersed in, a culture that was mentioned to you that had both, Buddhism and Confucianism, Taoism and Hinduism.
Sure.
You just seem to have to be immersed in that to really kind of understand it. Okay.
And Jesus never said, I was born a poor man and grew up poor. I mean,
No.
right? I mean, he never said that, because you would think that if he was, that's something that he could share to relate to with people.
Right. In fact, there's a quote in the Gospel of Luke in which Jesus traveled around women of means, and one of the women, his mother, was mentioned as a woman who was a rich woman, and so was Mary Magdeline.
In the Gnostic?
No, in the Gospel of Luke.
Oh, the Gospel of Luke. Okay.
In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus had women followers and disciples, and some of them were referred to as women of means, and there were 4 women of means. One was his mother, one was Mary Magdalene, another one was a lady named Joanna, whose husband was the estate manager of Herod the Great, and then there was another woman by the name of Susanna. So there are these rich women. So Jesus, you don't just become rich. You spend a lot of time, really developing and becoming wealthy.
Sure.
So there's that. Okay, so now when we get back to some of the other things that are important for Jesus and some of the things that I've been able to identify based off of his sayings, I realized that Jesus had some type of enlightenment experience, and it was very profound. And so it was this experience that really got him deeper into his understanding of the Father, what he referred to as the Father. And maybe he was using that term not in an abstract kind of idea, because there was something so intimate about his relationship with the divine that it just seemed as though it was very real, and it was like right in your presence. And he even says, the kingdom of heaven is inside of you. Okay, so I kind of determined that there was at least 4 major experiences that Jesus had in his missing years. Mm-hmm. So the other one was that he was robbed and beaten. So again, when I analyzed his sayings, there were a number of sayings that were very odd about being robbed and beaten. And I thought, well, this is very odd for a spiritual person to be talking about these, unless that maybe there was some element of that's true. There was a sexual experience that Jesus probably had that shamed him. One of the reasons why I think that is when he talks about the parable, the prodigal son son leaves home, and he squanders all of his money. And then there's this little kind of like afterthought, and he spent a lot of time with women. And so there seems to be something about women and his relationship with sexuality that affected Jesus in one way. And then there was another experience that he had.
Wait, I just want to go back on that, David. So are you saying like he had some kind of traumatic experience, or? Or was it more like Siddhartha, who had to go through this experience of experiencing the pleasures of life and going through the ups and downs of addiction and attachment? Is that what you mean here? Or
well, I just think that there was, if you think about kind of the ancient Hebrew concepts about sexuality, it's only through marriage that you have sex. And I think that there was experiences outside of that Jesus had, and that there was probably an element of shame into some of those experiences that he felt.
Okay, shame because of how he was taught to.
Exactly.
To think.
So that he had to kind of had to go through part of his sexuality in a way that wasn't part of his upbringing.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, but when you go back to the Buddha, remember his father was one of the kings of this one little small territory, and so his entire life was, when we think about the royal city in China, the Forbidden City, that was a concept that was very Eastern, in which you have a city where the royals live, and then you have a big wall around it. And Siddhartha Buddha, his father was a king of a small empire, and he had that experience that was cloistered. And it wasn't until he realized that there was a lot of things going on outside the walls of that forbidden city, his version of the Forbidden City, that he went, what's this all about? And so that's when he went on his quest. But I think Jesus's quest was it wasn't the same as Buddha and what he was looking for. It was just something had to prepare him for his destiny. Sure. Because he really felt that there was something that he was born to do, and it was embedded into his body.
Right. So it does make sense if you're going to be, even if you're God incarnate, and you're doing that for the very purpose of being human, which means making mistakes, perhaps going astray and learning that so that you can communicate as a human to other people. So that actually makes quite a bit of sense.
That's how I saw it. Part of what Paul does is that he puts Jesus on this mythical and archetypal pedestal in which he's the son of God, or he's the second son of Adam. He is the second Adam. He is the second Adam, and he's the son of God, and he's the Lord and Savior of the world, and he died for your sins. And all of those are all very mythic. But it doesn't really get you any deeper into the type of person that Jesus was, or what type of experiences that he had. Yeah. And let me just kind of end this with the one type of experience that I do feel that he also had as well. And that was, I think all of us that are sensitive, we all eventually get overwhelmed by humanity and by kind of the darkness of the world. And we all kind of fall prey to what kind of depths we go to and the hells we kind of enter into when we really go down these dark roads, these dark emotional roads. And we find ourselves in what is, proverbial kind of the pit of hell, in which you just think that all of human existence and all of, life itself is worthless and pointless. And there is an element of Jesus's sayings that point in that direction, that he had that experience. But
from that experience, he teaches
He came out of it.
And teaching a much higher and bigger lesson. And we'll continue more on this on the other side of this second and last break tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Paranormal Now this Easter. Happy Easter to all of you, of faith and otherwise. I hope that you enjoy tonight's perspective on David Collis's work for the missing years of Jesus and the more mystical side of things. So I see all of your questions. I promise when we get back from the other side of the break, I will get to as many of your questions as we can. And a friendly reminder, in the last 30 minutes, we'll open up the Paranormal Radio app lines. That's 855-472-5483 or 851-85-KGRA Live. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. I will see you on the Inverted Upside Down.
India's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. Tonight's guest is David Collis, and we'll be talking more about the life of Jesus, the man, the person, the human. Who was he? What did he learn? So, David, where would you like to take us next in this story? What have you found that is most fascinating?
Well, there's always the kind of the social conditions. And I'm finding that is a very strong and important element for me. And so the first century for Jesus was, rife with all kinds of ambiguities and uncertainties. Mm-hmm. And Jesus was attempting to and trying to accomplish something where he was giving new hope to people, and I think that's a very important message for us today, because when we kind of feel like, things are getting a little bit out of hand and we don't know where things are going, that even the first century, they had their own difficult problems. And so Jesus was providing us a sense of hope and expectations that were available, and, start to look to each other for help and to look inward as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very encouraging.
Did he do it better than others?
Well, let's just say this. There were things that he was able to do that he seemed to be very, very adept at. And one of the things that I've kind of come to realize, and we kind of were talking a little bit about, Christianity and resurrection, and did that event really happen? And today we use terms, a lot of the gurus that are out there today, they like to use the term technologies, what kind of technologies were available. And so at that time, there was no idea of this technology, but there seems to be a great deal of insight that Jesus had about the inner workings of the universe, and that he was able to tap into those. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he understood, quote, the technology of resurrection, ascension, and the technology of raising people from the dead. Because he seems to be, so much of his ministry was about all these miracles that he was performing, and I just can't believe that those are all fake, or that they are all just good stories to tell to people to get people interested in Jesus.
When you say technology,
mm-hmm.
When you say technology, what are you imagining?
Jesus seemed to have, he was able to bypass any type of machine, right, or any type of kind of amplification thing, and go directly into the state of the mind, mm-hmm. or the state of the universe, and manipulate it or use it to his benefit, so that he can perform the miracles that he performed. And I have no idea how that's done. I'm not a faith healer. I don't know that. I'm just, part of my mind believes that happened.
Well, you've had your own mystical experience too.
Yes, I've had many. So
is that why you believe that he really did do this? Was there something in those experiences of yours that?
My experiences have been more on an intellectual level and experiential level. They haven't mm-hmm. been on kind of the laying hands on somebody and healing them, or raising somebody from the dead, or mm-hmm. ascending, or floating during meditation and, levitating. None of those types of experiences have happened to me. I'm not saying that those don't exist. All I'm saying is they haven't happened to me, but I do believe that there are people who can do that. So
a lot of people, Christians, would think that if somebody does have those abilities, whether a psychic, telekinesis, that it's somehow evil. Is there anything in your research in the Gnostics, in the Gospels, that would indicate to you that having those abilities or exact same abilities, let's say, as Jesus is somehow, I don't know, evil?
I guess the matter is, using a gun is, because you shoot somebody and kill somebody, is that evil? Or is it you're trying to, empower yourself to force your will onto somebody else? Maybe that's, considered evil. But, if you're starting to use the energies of the universal energies are not evil. It's the application of that. Mm-hmm. So, I kind of use the bad metaphor with the gun. But anyway, the concept is that if you are involved in something, what is the purpose of what it is that you are trying to accomplish? And I think that's the telling sign. Now, is there evil out there? Yeah, I really do think that there are very evil, energies. There are evil people, and that they're using evil or using these types of energies in ways that are highly, highly destructive.
And how do we define good and evil? Isn't that really difficult to do, especially if you accept that the universe is all one interconnected, thing, God, whatever you want to call it. So if something evil is happening, but something good is happening, they're inextricably linked somehow.
That's correct.
So how is evil? Element. Yeah, how is evil, right? Like how did we get there? How does such a thing even exist?
Well, I think it's a spiral. So the spiral either goes in or it goes out, right? So if it's an inward spiral in which all you're trying to do is, like, say, accumulate material wealth or gain more power or to assert your will over others in a very large way, and you're going, hey, look, I'm doing this because I can do it. And then you start realizing that in the wake of everything that you're doing, there's all of this death and destruction and disappointment and anger and hurt that, maybe you are involved in something that is, even though it's possible and it's part of the natural flow of the way things can work, it's not really moving in the direction in which we're trying to unite people or bring peace or bring joy or happiness or comfort or whatnot. And so,
much like the gun, that's kind of what Lucifer then personifies, right? That the inflicting and forcing your own power on to others outside of their own will. And so in a sense, that's kind of evil, right?
Well, it seems to point in that direction. Let's just say that.
Which then also begs the question, I know in some of the early Gnostic religions, I don't even know religion's the right word, cults or how you refer to them, but that there were like two different types of gods, and that the Old Testament God was actually not a good spirit. Are you familiar with this? Can you?
Yeah. So
it gets really controversial here. Yeah.
It does. Okay, so let me just kind of point out a couple of things. When Jesus is around, we seem to have some element, and we don't know when for sure Gnosticism develops, but it's developing somewhere around the same time Jesus is. Okay, so now Jesus is roughly around, when he does his ministries, around the year 30. Okay, so by the time you end the first century, there is a new community of Gnostics that have started to really kind of blossom. And you're going to see this blossoming in their literature. And so the Gospel of Thomas has very kind of straightforward sayings that are very similar to what Jesus was using in the way Jesus was talking. Mm-hmm. They're almost identical. And it's very difficult to say when this compilation of sayings of Jesus were compiled and whether or not they're all Jesus. If they're all Jesus, it really makes, an amazing story. My guess is that there was a community who believed in Jesus and that they kind of went through their own development. And they were thinking through some of the issues that Jesus was talking about and using the same format that he was using. By the time you get to the second century, the end of the first and into the second, things are getting more allegorical and more metaphorical. And that is, it's it's just exploding with these big ideas. And so when we start getting into the creator God, and then you get into Sophia, and you get into the archons and all these different types of elements into the Gnostic story, we're seeing the way in which my guess is that there were a lot of Jews that were part of the Gnostic the movement, because they were using so many Jewish concepts, and they are grafting them in with the Gnostic ideas, and they were grafting them in with the Greek ideas. Mm-hmm. And so they were thinking about the first, instead of the prime mover, the first cause, the one that's moving things and getting it started, they're coming up with their own idea of the prime mover.
The prime mover being the one who created
the one that's kind of getting the whole ball rolling. So
okay.
If you kind of imagine that we've got two parts to this. We got one part on a very spiritual side in which there's nothing exists. This is what the Buddhists call and the Hindus call nothingness or emptiness. There's nothing in this space. The Greeks called that the mystery. Now, what's behind the mystery is the mystery of mysteries. We don't know. Something gets the ball rolling, right? There's the first cause, there's the prime mover, something, there's the verse, God says, and the world, now, the universe is created, there's a word, something is happening. Once that happens, now you have everything starting to come out of this, what I refer to as pure potential, this nothingness, and everything is starting to come into being. The issue is that when it got into the Gnostics kept thinking that the person who created all of this on the other side of this veil, so to speak, got it wrong. And because they got it wrong, they weren't acting in the true nature of the divine, because they didn't fully appreciate the divine. They thought they were doing the divine will, but they started off and doing something, and that got off. The wheels fell off. It fell off the rail. All of those kind of metaphors. It just went awry, and so there was something very, very kind of mischievous and dark about what happened because of this personification of energy and consciousness that moved along. That it was required by somebody like Jesus as a savior to come and show us back the true way. And the Christians come up with the idea that Jesus died for your sin, and now because you accept Jesus and Jesus, you now get to enter into heaven. The Gnostics believed completely, it kind of reversed the whole process, meaning we're still in this really bad place. The whole world, all of existence, and all the material world is all bad. And the only thing that's good is spirituality. And so Jesus showed us how to go back to the Father. So that was the Gnostic point of view.
The prime mover and the Father are different.
Yes.
And so how can the prime mover possibly create all existence without the Father?
So now we have, you keep getting into deeper mysteries here.
Yeah.
So the mysteries is if there's pure potential, right, for things to exist, and when things start to exist, what else has to happen now that it's in existence, right? And so what happens is if you have your basic elements in physics, you have your strong nuclear force, your weak nuclear force, magnetism, and electricity, right? So it's all of those things coming together with all the electrons and the neutrons and the protons, and coming together to create, elements. And those elements then create, by combining those elements, create new things. And then from those new things are now created. And so now we're starting to get this chain effect in which one thing is creating another, which is now creating another and creating another and creating another. And so we're kind of, we're now out here in this field in which there's all this stuff. And the Gnostics were trying to say, well, how do you kind of get back to the original source? Well, you have to keep going. You have to reverse the whole process.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, in the same way that the Holy Trinity makes sense. But right.
I mean, the thing is what's out there? Well, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
Something's there.
It's the chicken or the egg question, essentially. Right.
Right. So how does spirituality translate into material, the material world? I don't know.
So according
and that's what the Egyptians were trying to work through as well.
Yeah.
How does the material body go into the spiritual body?
Right. And
how does that mechanism work?
I know there are different cults of the or groups of the Gnostics. What term do you use when you refer to the Gnostics? Just the Gnostics?
Just a general. See, the Gnostics were Christians. So Christianity within itself, it's like there's two brothers, so to speak. There's Cain and Abel, right? And one was the Gnostics and the other one the proto-Christians. Mm-hmm. They considered themselves Christians.
Okay.
Isn't that bizarre?
Well, I mean, I think it's bizarre from a modern day Christian perspective. Yeah. But so the question is, do they think that the material is in fact non-divine, or was that like the veil?
Yes. See, when you get into the Neoplatonists, they rejected the Gnostics because the Gnostics inherently said all the material world is evil. It's all bad. It's all horrible. And everyone, no, this is showing you another side, another face of the divine. It's a divine face. So they were, not only were the Christians against them, but there was also the Neoplatonists, the philosophers from Greece that were also against the Gnostics for what they were thinking.
Well, especially Jesus teaching and preaching love and compassion and all these things. It's contradictory, actually, to say that this material reality that we're living in is inherently evil.
Right.
If within the matrix of that world, you are spreading love and compassion.
Exactly.
Those two things can't, those two ideas can't simultaneously exist.
No.
So therefore the material world is not evil, especially if it comes from the divine.
Exactly.
Okay.
So something has fallen, something has gotten off the rail, and everybody's been wondering for a very long time, why are things so bad?
And we're still wondering.
I want you to know. So this is an interesting issue that I kind of also started to explore. I was looking at the different ideas of eternity and what happens after death, right? And so the Jews had their version of things, the Greeks had their version of things, the Egyptians had their version, and then you got into the Babylonians and the Euphrates, the Mesopotamian area, right? So they had their versions of immortality, and that was very, very important. What happens after death? Everybody wanted to know, and no one had any good answers, right? So the Greeks came up with, you become immortal if your name is associated with some enormous feat that you accomplished, like Hercules or Achilles.
Sure.
And then that
was like today's version of being an Instagram star or something.
Right. Okay. So you've done something on the field of battle that,
something of note.
So amazing that it rose up above and beyond the concept, and now your immortality is how you'll be remembered in history. Okay, when you get into one of the first essentially novels that was created or that was written, called the Epic of Gilgamesh, there was Gilgamesh went on a quest, and the quest was what happens after I die, because I'm born of I have a female, my mom is human, and my dad is divine, and so there is a divine nature inside of me. And so they divided it up not equally in 50-50 parts. It was 60-40, so it was 60% divine and 40% human. And so Gilgamesh, who was one of the kings of Mesopotamia, he felt that he should be allowed to go into the pantheon of the divine world. And so he went on this quest to find out if that was true or not. And he went through all these trials and tribulations. It's the total journey of the hero thing that Joseph Campbell was into. It's the same thing, but back in the 500 BC or even earlier. So he finally meets the wise man on top of the mountain, which is a version of Noah, and he just says, "Look, you're never going to go into heaven because you're human. You'll never get there. So the best thing you can do is, enjoy your status and enjoy your wife and enjoy wine, wine, women, and song. So you're not going to get there." And then, so that was the other end of the thing, of this immortality issue. Then Jesus comes along and talks about, the divine. and that the kingdom of heaven is inside of you and it's all around you, and we need to participate in that. And then you have the Egyptian concept too, is that there is a mechanism and a ritual that you need to go through to become divine. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to pass the judgment day, which is what the Christians end up, adopting as part of their story, is that at the end of your life, there is a judgment. And the judgment is that if your heart is as light as a feather, then you can go in and become part of the divine community.
I'm interested in the Gnostic point of view in that regard, because, so often people are told that only if you believe in Jesus as your personal savior can you get into heaven. But then we've kind of gotten mixed messages from the Pope. We've gotten mixed messages from different ministers and priests on that regard. So collectively, all the Gnostics and the Gospels, what do they tell us about that? Or is it what you just said, that it's really what's in your heart?
Well, so now we have, I kind of go back and just look at some of this and I say, where are some of these ideas about immortality coming from? Well, they're coming from this concept we call agricultural societies. So is there something inherent about agricultural societies that has a kind of a preconceived idea that somehow our life should go on, right? So, of course, we die, or a seed dies, it goes into the ground, it dies, and then it comes up and it becomes something different. And so that very concept is now kind of pointing in this direction that there is more to life than what we're seeing. And maybe our life is just like a seed. We live here on this earth and we have these experiences, and when we die, then something else happens. The question is does it keep happening over and over and over and over again, like reincarnation? Or is there some element of ourselves and of our soul that has to experience this for whatever reason? I still don't understand. Right. But that we get to experience and then we move on. And that's a very Buddhist concept as well. We just move on from the material world.
Yeah, I've heard mixed things about reincarnation in the Bible. So is it ambiguous? Or is there really just one afterlife according to the Christian doctrine?
Well, Christians wanted to say, and again, this kind of goes back to another era in which your decisions, and this is referred to as the axial age. So when the Vedas came into the Upanishads, there was this concept where your decisions have cosmic consequences. And that idea has still lived with us. So that's our dilemma. Do our personal decisions today have cosmic consequences?
Well, that's the butterfly effect.
It is. So
yeah. So we have to live with that. Whether you reincarnate or there's one life or this is it, your choices have consequences.
That's correct. Your choices have consequences. So if I don't accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, does that automatically send me off into hell for eternity?
Does it?
I mean, that seems very harsh to me. Now this gets into a very weird part of Christianity, which is Jesus is supposed to be the incarnation of love, in which God has redeemed us and forgiven us all of our sins, and yet if we don't accept the gift, we go to hell. So there's some weird kind of dynamic in that. And anyway, go ahead.
Oh no! Well, I was going to say, if you are a good, kind person, you're loving and you're giving, you're compassionate. You tick all the boxes, except you were born 500,000 years ago or yesterday in some part of the world, and you were never exposed. What about all the people that were born before Jesus came down?
Right.
So.
See, and that's a very Catholic thing of you to try to figure out what is limbo.
Yes,
because there's so many anomalies there, right?
Well, the good thing about Catholicism, though, is that it does kind of make you think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Something's happening, something's going on, and we're going to try to make sense of it.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate that, that mythology, demonology, like all that is so fascinating to me. But, there is that slippery side where, like George Lucas says, only Sith think in absolutes. deal in absolutes, and because there's something kind of inherently evil about being an absolutist of some kind, to say you're canceled, you're done, goodbye. Here on this earth, there's that argument of cancel culture, whatever,
Yes.
right? But that's like the grandest cancel culture of all is
Right.
for the creator to say, you didn't do this one thing, despite everything else that's good about you. You didn't do this one thing, and therefore you're canceled to hell. That's harsh.
It is very harsh.
But the resurrection of Jesus, because it seems so much bigger than that, right? It seems like he's saying, I'm so loving, I'm so compassionate, that this act alone is opening the door of heaven to all of you sinners.
I think that's the message, isn't it? In fact, what Jesus was saying to me, at least in my opinion and in my perception, is that his act of going to the cross was his act of overcoming death and the fear of death and the fear of pain. And he's telling all of his disciples, because part of his ministry was to show and tell his disciples how things work in the kingdom of heaven. They work this way. And one of them is not to worry about your body and not to worry about the pain and not to worry about death, because there's another reality that exists beyond our perceptions. And yet we can still participate in it right now.
Now, did all the Gnostic Gospels, did they believe in the resurrection?
They didn't take... that's a very interesting point. They believed in the concept of the Savior. They believed in the concept that yourself and the Father are one and the same thing, and that you have to realize and experience yourself as immortal and yourself as part of this bigger picture.
Yeah.
So that was the journey, is to go through what is the nature of the self. So resurrection is more of a metaphorical term than it is a literal experience, historical experience. So your dead body is resurrected, and now new life has come into it because you're recognizing the power and your divinity, which is pure spirituality, pure self.
Right. So why does Jesus, why is love thy neighbor so central to his tenets?
Because it was connecting to other people. It was a connecting element. It wasn't a divisive element. It was a way in which you bring peace to the world. It's a way that you bring comfort to the world. It's the way in which you bring unity to the people that you are with. And it is to show that the world is not as brutal and as horrible and as dark as it can be. And that there is another element, a shining light, and love seems to be the mechanism for this to occur.
Now, what is this light? I know the Gnostics, I think, kind of explored this a little bit more. Like, what is the nature of the universe, of the divine? What is it made of?
Well, again, it went through different grades. So we're down at the very bottom. It's a very dense grade. And then the whole point is to keep releasing all of the dead parts of ourselves so that we can keep rising up, like cream that you do when you boil cream and you make like half and half. So it's to get beyond our physicality, right? And the limits of our physicality.
Yeah. Is it kind of like the myths of coming out of the underworld and moving up and evolving?
See, those are agricultural myths. Again, it goes back to the idea of the seed going into the ground. And so,
well, even the Hopi people, right? It's like
going into the ground.
And people come out of the ground and go up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think that's agricultural related too?
Well, agriculture had a very, very strong food. Food is a very important idea in agricultural societies because it's the crop that you are creating. And those crops now it goes from seed, which is one element. And here's a spiritual truism, is that what goes in is not what comes out. So what goes into the ground is not what comes out of the ground. What goes into the body, semen going into the body, comes out, a human being. So there seems to be this very, very fascinating and thorny issue about what goes in is not what comes out. So what's this transition? Again, you also have the caterpillar and the butterfly concept as well. So there are these elements that are within our nature, within our societies, that touch upon this concept. Now, directly, how do we deal with the ant people, the Hopis? Mm-hmm. When you read the book of Revelation, what is this that's going to be unleashed on the world? These demons that have been locked up into the underworld. I don't know what that is. I mean, that's so far removed from our reality, but apparently with those who created it or those who wrote about it, there must have been some, I don't know, they touched upon it and somehow. Can you just think about it and go, oh, yeah, it's the underworld? No, it seemed to be a very prevalent concept for them. Well, but it isn't for us anymore, so I don't know how to address that.
Well, it goes to what you were saying earlier about Jesus having this ability to see beyond, right? And use that sort of spiritual technology to achieve these amazing feats. We know that Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, when they were working on equations or had ideas, that they kind of explained it as, this ether where they could see things and visualize things and they come to it. And there's, it's like this matrix that's out there. Right. And, so maybe, like you've had mystical experiences, others today have mystical experiences. So maybe that's what that is. We're all tapping into it and we're seeing these layers that exist, even though they're kind of intangible. We know they're there.
Plato talks about those as essences.
Now, the Holy Trinity, does that relate again to the Pythagorean school as well? Because there's that sort of mathematical, geometrical element to it.
So the concept of the Trinity was Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and that was canonized during the Nicene Creed. Now, I'm sure there was an element that was already moving forward or moving before that, up to that point in which it was then canonized. But Jesus, he talked about the Holy Spirit, but when I was reading the Essenes were talking about the Holy Spirit. So there was already a pre-existing understanding of the Holy Spirit before Jesus was around.
Yeah.
So there must have been something that was already happening within the Jewish culture, of which the Holy Spirit was a part of. And then Jesus was also using that as a vehicle. Now, my feeling is that Jesus had to teach the way he taught, and he had to talk about the metaphors the way that he did, because the people that he was talking to could only understand that. Right. If Albert Einstein could only talk to like first or second grader, he sure wasn't going to start writing out mathematical equations on a blackboard about grand unified field theories. I just don't think that was going to happen. And I think Jesus had to use the existing concepts of the day and the existing language of the day and use some existing metaphors and parables of his day so that he can get his message across.
Right. Well, like any of us who have ideas, sometimes we just use an allegory or analogy or metaphor, even for more simple ideas. So that makes sense. All right, we have our first caller, Ronald from Minnesota. You're on with David Collis. How are you, Ronald?
Hey, Alan. Happy Easter to you and to David. Very good guest and an interesting show. Thank you.
Happy Easter. Thank you.
Hey, I had a question for you about, you answered most of the ones that I had, so I don't need to ask those. But I have one about the false prophet. Remember when Christ was talking to everyone and he said, don't follow after the false prophets, Mm-hmm. And then there was a one where they were on the road and Peter had cut the ear to the one guy. But
Ron, can you repeat that? We lost you for a sec.
He said, "Don't." Okay, yeah. I was talking about the false prophet issue, where Jesus told them not to follow after false prophets, and then they were on the road, and Peter had cut the ear off of one person, and then Jesus forgave the guy for whatever that situation was. But then they went off on their own direction. And he said, let them go. Let them do their own. They're doing good work with whatever they're doing, preaching whatever they're preaching. But where does the false prophets come in? If Jesus was letting those other people preach whatever they're preaching, okay,
So you're saying if Jesus has tolerance for these other teachings, then how does that tie into the false prophet? Is it contradictory? Is that your question?
Yes.
It's an interesting question.
Exactly.
Yeah, the concepts of the false prophets are very, very interesting. And I don't have a full appreciation of everything about it, but let me just kind of go back and have a little historical context. The Essenes were a community that lived out by the Dead Sea, and they were a very close-knit group of people who believed that they were in the end times, and that they believed that there was the battle of good and evil about to happen, and that there was going to be the Messiah was going to be coming, etc. And so there was the teacher of righteousness. So there was somebody that was in this community that was just a really powerful person. And there was there must have been some type of fight or a disagreement in which another person within this community left. That person was referred to as the teacher of lies. And so you have the teacher of you have the teacher of righteousness, and then you have the teacher of lies. And this is a way in which people that were part of a group believed one side of the story, and the person that left is now going to be branded somebody else or something else, like a teacher of lies. And so Christianity is going to start to adopt these same ideas that if you don't believe in us, then there's the Antichrist. And so they set all of this up in motion in which there's a for and against. So, yeah, there is something going on in which somebody is going to be coming up and disagreeing with certain principles that the Christians are going to be talking about. Paul was very, very concerned about what was referred to as these false prophets. But some of these false prophets are the ones that probably said, hey, some of the things that you're teaching are not necessarily the types of teachings that Jesus was talking about, because Paul, in a very in a funny way, never spoke about Jesus directly, like the way you find in the Gospels. He was always referring to Jesus in an abstraction. He came to me, he spoke to me, as this, as God, as this, an etheric being, and then he died for our sins. He's the savior of the world. He's the second Adam. He uses those types of terms. So if you don't necessarily agree with that, then he seems to have a strong problem with you in that regard. The other thing is that Paul was a very devout Jew. He was a Pharisee, and so he had a very strong moral compass. And when he was traveling around the Roman Empire, his morality was being constantly challenged at every level, because they just did things differently than the way that he understood things to do. So he was constantly up against that as well. Mm-hmm. And then I know that you referenced, Ronald, when Peter cut off Malchus's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. That happened before Jesus, obviously was on his way to his crucifixion. And so I just kind of wanted to clarify that. And that was a very important thing, because, here's Peter looking at things from a very kind of a personal point of view, which is we're being threatened. And Jesus recognized this as something that has to happen. And so Peter is getting in the way for allowing all this to happen. And so he's asking, Peter to stop what you're doing. And then he heals Malchus.
Yeah, I mean, this is a man that was truly beautiful and compassionate. Ron, do you have any personal relationship with Christianity at all, or?
I do personally, yes, and I do check out people when they are talking about things they're talking about. I think David is pretty well learned or trained in what he's teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that he's talking off the side of his head or whatever, or off the top of his head. He knows what he's talking about.
Sure. All right. Thank you so much, Ron, and happy Easter again.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you for the show.
All right. So we have our second caller, Lauren from Connecticut. Welcome to Paranormal Now. How are you, Lauren?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good.
Alan?
Thanks for joining.
I have a question for David regarding Mary Magdalene, and I was just wondering his thoughts on whether or not it was she that's Jesus's beloved and not John the disciple, as well as if she and Jesus were married, if they had children, that kind of thing that you hear about in Dan Brown's book and some of the other popular thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, I totally believe that Jesus was married and that he was married to Mary Magdalene and that they had children. So when Jesus talks about, I was trying to point out earlier that when Jesus is doing all of his sayings in his parables, there's a lot of autobiographical elements to Jesus' sayings. Mm-hmm. And he has a parable about the kingdom of heaven as being like these children. And he does not want his disciples to dismiss them. And I thought, God, this sounds just like a father would. So he's recognizing the joy that children have, as 4 and 5 and 6 years old. And he's trying to emulate that same level of innocence. So I do believe because of that, that's one of the reasons why I believe that he was married. And then I also think that there's an element of Mary Magdalene that got trashed in the New Testament. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about the Essenes, that if the Essenes were using a tactic which said, if you are with me, then these are all the great things. And if you're not with me, then they're going to start branding you as some type of heretic or, some outsider. And they really have a very vicious way of doing that. And when I looked at the New Testament, I was seeing the same kind of pattern. So anybody that was kind of like an outsider was considered a false prophet. Mary, who might have been, as close to Jesus as possible, maybe even married to him, which is my belief. She's being portrayed as a prostitute. The question is there any truth to that? She is minimized in every way. Jesus's family is minimized in almost every way except his mother. Jesus' his younger brother, James. Jesus actually had 4 brothers. Mm-hmm. His brother James ended up becoming the father of the church. We don't hear any of that in the gospel whatsoever. We just hear that when we hear about his family, they're saying that, Jesus is doing these things. He's doing them because he's crazy. So you kind of there's something kind of strange about the way certain Christians are being portrayed and branded or brandished. So, Mary Magdalene is one of those people that seems to be branded, a prostitute. And I'm thinking, why would you do that? Because in the Gospel of Thomas, she's the closest disciple to Jesus. And then there's actually the Gospel of Mary, in which Jesus is supposedly have kissed her on the lips. Uh-huh. So, and here's the other thing. There's a jealousy that's taking place, and this jealousy amongst the disciples they're thinking that somehow Jesus is the Messiah. He's going to be the King of the Jews, so he's going to set up his kingdom here in Jerusalem, and they're going to be part of it. So they sure don't want to have any women being, taken some of their territory or some of their power away. So there must have been some type of conflict, at least in my mind, there was a conflict that was taking place and in which Jesus was trying to include more women into the ministry, and some of the old habits and power plays with the men were trying to push them out. And this was one way to do it.
Interesting. Thanks, Lauren. Do you have another question?
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Lauren, did I answer that question?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. So, yeah, I think that isn't there a little bit of a confusion between Mary, who's described as a prostitute, and Mary Magdalene? I thought there was a discrepancy between those two characters.
Well, this is another funny issue. The way in which the New Testament and the Gospels were written is that they use a lot of Marys, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And Mary was a name for the women that were rebelling against Rome. So if you were Jewish and you were rebelling against Rome as a woman, you were considered a Mary.
You were considered
So-
a Mary.
Mary. It's just Mary, so that was the pejorative.
Referencing who?
Referencing any woman who was Jewish that was against the Roman Empire.
Was just a Mary.
You were just Mary.
That's kind of like we use the term calling someone a Karen today or something.
Yes. Yeah. You were Mary. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a third caller on the line, Bobby from Louisiana. Welcome to Paranormal Now.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan, for the great show. And David,
Thanks, Bob.
I have a question. What's that?
Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
Yes. So, David, do you think Jesus may have some siblings, or what's your give or take about it?
Well, the New Testament talks about his brothers. And so his brothers was James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. So that there's a reference there. So there was, that blood was moving around. And he also had sisters. And I do believe that he had a child, at least one. Here's the funny thing. Here's another kind of one of those little interesting factoids.
Sure.
Mary Magdeline is supposedly have gone to the south of France. So she had to flee because her life was probably in danger. The king, this is it. Okay. So Herod the Great had all these sons, and one of them, well, he killed most of them off. All the ones that were the most competent, he ended up killing because he was concerned that they were going to take his place. Anyway, one of the other ones, and this is also, it's not the one that you would recognize, but it is in the Gospels, in which Herod ends up marrying his brother's wife. Well, that wife was the daughter of one of the neighboring kings. Well, that king, when he found out that the daughter got dismissed and ended up with the other brother, he went after that king. And that king fled to the same place Mary fled to, which is the south of France. Isn't that fascinating? So maybe there was already something in the south of France that had this community of exiles, expatriates.
I see. Well, thank you for the great show, and always with excellent producing, and you are a great guest.
Hey, thank you, Bobby. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Have a good night. So, David, I have a question from earlier. Dan mentions what historical records, if any, besides the Gospels, speak of him. Josephus never mentioned him, and this always bothered me. What's your take on that?
Okay, so we now get into the historical sources. And so this is a very, very important issue. Mm-hmm. Jesus is not mentioned outside of the Gospels, except in Josephus. And it seems that reference also is a bit problematic. However, Josephus is extraordinarily angry with all the Jews that decided that they were now the Messiah. So what we're having at this particular time in Jesus's era is not a single person claiming to be a Messiah, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people claiming to be the Messiah. So something happened that made Jesus stand out amongst all of those. Okay, so now we get back into the other nitty-gritty. There's two tracks here that I kind of was able to determine.
Sure.
One is that when I was reading a lot of the literature, so what I did is I was just reading a lot of anthologies. So I was reading just a lot of spiritual anthologies of that time. Mm-hmm. And when we get to the time of Jesus and that era, we're seeing certain ideas coming up to that point, and then all of a sudden moving off in all these other directions. So something caused all of these spiritual ideas to move in new directions. And the person at the hub of all of this seems to be this guy named Jesus. The other thing is that if Jesus didn't exist, there seems to be some compelling evidence that would really point or at least kind of put holes into this idea. And that is, if Jesus didn't exist, it would be like saying that Albert Einstein didn't exist, but his ideas did. So who's coming up with the ideas that, if Albert Einstein didn't come up with, somebody else is coming up with all these ideas.
Well, so Shakespeare, if Shakespeare didn't exist, somebody created those ideas.
Somebody's behind Shakespeare.
Somebody's
right?
behind Shakespeare.
Somebody's still behind Shakespeare. So who is it, and what's that purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're still dealing with some really advanced spiritual understandings that I kind of equivalent to the Albert Einstein ideas of E equals MC squared. And so if Jesus didn't exist, or Jesus is a composite, and somebody is out there compositing this person is really, really, really smart.
Right. Yeah.
So, and he's talking about love and compassion, which is really an advanced way of thinking as opposed to revenge or ostracizing people. Jesus, when he was walking around, his disciples would say, hey, what did this person do? What sins did this person commit? And he said, nothing.
I have a question from I have a question from X Lady. We only have a few minutes, so I want to squeeze this in. How far did you think Jesus traveled both before and after he made his, quote, public appearance?
Well, I believe that his family went down to Egypt and that they probably had some strong business connections down in Egypt. I also think that there was a strong group of people that understood that Jesus was a very special individual, and that they helped support him get another final layer of training that they couldn't provide, and that they financed him to go to the East. And I can't tell you why I know that. I'm just telling you that's what I believe.
That's interesting. All right, a question from Neutron. As an offhand esoteric question, from your studies of Jesus' life, do you believe his soul emanated into his incarnated body at his initial birth, or only later in his young life, such as during his Buddhist training after being enlightened?
Yeah, this is a very, very tricky and thorny issue. So the question is, what comes first? I am of the opinion that you enter in, at the time of conception, your soul enters into that egg, and you then go through the whole gestation period, and then you get birth, and that that's where you are, and that's where you come from. Now, I know of people who talk about how they left and a walk-in stepped into their body. I understand that there is that concept that's out there, and that I have met people who claim that happened to them. I am just going to go back to my guns that Jesus was born, he was conceived, he was born, and he lived out his life in his body all through from birth to death. There was no walk-in. He was it.
Besides prayer, whether you believe in him as a god or just his ideas, how does one get closer to being like him?
Oh, well, one of the most amazing things about spirituality at that time, and still to this day, is to emulate your gods. So Christianity is a practice. So practice compassion, practice feeding people, practice, understanding that there's a larger source out there than you. And that's what Jesus was involved in. And that source, according to Jesus, is moving through you, can move through you, and does move through you and inspire you. And Jesus is the type where I think he was, as he entered into his ministry, the question that I had was, what did Jesus bring to his ministry, and what did he learn on the job? Mm-hmm. So I think this is a very important issue. Now, I can't say everything that happened to him, but I do know that there were things that he learned on the job. And I also know that there are things that he brought to the table. So his understanding of the Father was something he brought to the table before he started his ministry. It was because of his understanding of the Father and his understanding and the relationship between compassion, wisdom, and commitment was something that he already knew and that he had to involve himself in. I am not a believer that he had to go to John the Baptist to get baptized by the Holy Spirit. I believe that experience had already happened to him, but I think that somehow that was an initiation rite for him, and it was the demarcation moment for him to say, I am ready and I'm going to do this.
Okay, you have 30 seconds to answer this last question. You did say that you believed in some of those miracles. Do you think his resurrection was real?
Yes.
You do?
I do. In fact, I actually had visions of Jesus. So, and when Paul talks about 500 people seeing Jesus, there must have been something about that was very true.
So then,
Paul
do you consider
wasn't just the only one that had that kind of experience. There must have been others.
Oh, sure. I mean, people today explain those experiences as being real to them, happening now. And do you consider yourself then a Christian or something else?
I know this really, really well, and so I consider myself a person who's spiritually inclined, and that Christianity just happens to be part of my heritage and what I'm interested in.
Well, the Gnostics are all about seeking wisdom, right? And getting answers.
Here we are, seeking how to seek wisdom.
And here we are. Thank you, David, for helping us along this journey of seeking wisdom. If anybody has any questions for David, how do they get in touch with you?
I have a Facebook page. You can go there and you can just message me. Okay,
great. And you want to find out more about
Collis.
DavidCollis.com if you'd like to get the book, Interviewing Jesus the Man.
It's on Amazon.
Go right to Amazon. All right. Thank you, David. Have a good night.
Hey, thank you, Alan.
All right. Thank you, everyone, Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight on this lovely Easter evening. I'm so glad I got to hang out here and spend it with all of you. And, it is a special day of reflection. And I think it's a day of appreciation on a grand spiritual level, but also just for those, whether like my parents or my wife, who I just love so much through and through, friends, acquaintances who have made small sacrifices or big sacrifices to help me and to help so many of us in our lives. It's a day, I think, of appreciation, because we do all suffer in our own way, and there are those who suffer to help us. And that's, a harsh reality, but it's also one of the most beautiful aspects of being human, being there for each other. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. For everyone else on Paranormal Now, this is Alan B. Smith. Thank you so much, Bill Skywatcher, for being so generous and producing tonight. And thank you to our KGRA Head of Operations, Eric Brager. And as always, everyone, until next time, live in the mystery.